Sometimes it begins with something so small that you almost dismiss it. A conversation that arrives at the exact moment you needed it. A delay that quietly changes the direction of your day. A strange feeling that won't leave you alone. You ask for clarity, for direction, for some kind of sign that you're not wandering blindly through life. Yet what comes back rarely looks like an answer. And still, somewhere beneath the surface, you can't shake the feeling that something has been responding to you all along. What if the reason so many people feel lost isn't because reality is silent, but because they expect it to speak in a language it never uses? What if the patterns you've been noticing, the recurring situations, the unexpected coincidences, even some of the frustrations you've been trying to escape, are connected by something deeper than chance? There is a possibility that the response you've been waiting for has already arrived many times. The real question is why it remains invisible to most people, and what changes the moment you finally learn how to recognize it. Most people grow up believing that life happens to them. Events appear, problems emerge, opportunities arrive or disappear, and everything seems to unfold according to luck, circumstance, or random chance. Yet there comes a moment when that explanation begins to feel incomplete. You notice that certain experiences seem strangely connected to what has been occupying your mind for weeks, or even months. Not in an obvious way, but in a way that feels difficult to ignore. Think about a time when you became deeply focused on a particular question. Perhaps you were considering a major change, doubting a relationship, or wondering whether to pursue a different path. Suddenly, conversations, books, articles, and unexpected encounters seemed to revolve around the exact theme you had been wrestling with internally. The world had not changed overnight, yet somehow it appeared to be reflecting something back to you. One hidden truth that many people overlook is that reality rarely responds with direct statements. It responds through experience. Instead of telling you what to do, it places situations in front of you. Instead of delivering certainty, it offers reflections. The response often arrives disguised as an opportunity, a disappointment, an attraction, or even a feeling that refuses to leave your attention. This becomes especially noticeable during periods of transition. When an old version of yourself begins to fall away, reality often seems to rearrange itself around that process. Certain friendships fade. New interests emerge. Unexpected possibilities appear. It can feel chaotic at first, but looking back, many people realize those changes formed a coherent pattern that only became visible afterward. There is a paradox here. The more desperately someone demands answers, the harder those answers become to recognize. But when attention softens, subtle feedback becomes easier to notice. Reality seems less like a machine dispensing rewards and punishments, and more like a mirror constantly revealing the consequences of thoughts, choices, fears, and intentions. You may have experienced this without realizing it. Perhaps every time you ignored an important truth, life became increasingly uncomfortable. Not because you were being punished, but because the same lesson kept returning in different forms. Different people, different circumstances. The same underlying message, almost as if reality was patiently repeating itself until something finally clicked. This doesn't require supernatural assumptions. Anyone can observe how inner states influence perception, decisions, behavior, and relationships. Small shifts inside create ripple effects outside. The feedback may be delayed, subtle, or disguised, but it accumulates. Over time, life begins revealing patterns that seem too precise to be dismissed as meaningless noise. Yet if reality is constantly responding, an even more interesting question emerges. Why do so many people spend years asking for answers while remaining completely unable to recognize the responses that are already appearing around them? The strange thing is that people often receive what they asked for and overlook it entirely. Not because the response wasn't there, but because it arrived wearing the wrong costume. They expected a dramatic revelation. Reality offered a quiet observation. They expected certainty. Reality presented a possibility. They expected a door to swing open. Reality revealed a subtle crack in the wall. Modern life makes this blindness even stronger. Attention is constantly pulled outward. Notifications, schedules, obligations, endless streams of information. Very little space remains for noticing the quieter movements happening beneath the surface. The signals are present, but they are competing against a world designed to keep awareness fragmented. There is also a psychological reason. Human beings tend to see what they already expect to see. The mind builds stories about how answers should arrive, then filters out everything that doesn't fit those expectations. This means that the response itself is often rejected before it is consciously recognized. It appears, but the mind labels it irrelevant and moves on. Consider how often people ask for change while secretly hoping everything remains familiar. They ask for a new chapter but cling to the identity that belongs to the old one. Then life begins removing what no longer fits, and instead of recognizing the response, they interpret the disruption as a mistake. The answer arrived, but it looked like loss instead of progress. Another reason is emotional noise. Fear, anxiety, resentment, and urgency can become so loud that they drown out subtler forms of perception. When someone is consumed by worry, every event gets interpreted through the lens of that worry. The response may be standing directly in front of them, but their emotional state makes it impossible to see clearly. Have you ever looked back on a period of your life and suddenly realized that the clues were everywhere? At the time, everything felt confusing. Years later, the pattern appears obvious. What changed was not reality. What changed was perspective. Distance allowed meaning to emerge from experiences that once seemed disconnected. This reveals something important. Recognition often depends less on intelligence and more on awareness. Some of the most educated people remain blind to recurring patterns in their lives, while others notice profound meaning in seemingly ordinary experiences. The difference is not knowledge. It is attention. And once attention begins to sharpen, something remarkable starts to happen. You notice that reality rarely repeats itself randomly. Certain themes, situations, emotions, and encounters seem to return again and again, almost as if they are speaking a language that most people never learn to read. There is a reason certain experiences seem to follow you from one chapter of life into the next. Different faces, different cities, different jobs, different circumstances, yet somehow the emotional experience remains strangely familiar. Most people assume this is coincidence. They focus on the changing details and miss the deeper pattern underneath. But reality often speaks through repetition long before it speaks through resolution. You may have noticed this in relationships. A person leaves your life, and months or years later someone entirely different arrives carrying remarkably similar dynamics. At first, the similarities appear superficial. Then the same frustrations emerge, the same conflicts, the same emotional reactions. It can feel as though life is repeating itself, but perhaps what is repeating is not the situation. Perhaps it is the lesson waiting to be understood. One of the hidden truths about patterns is that they rarely point toward what is happening around you. They usually point toward something happening within you. Reality often uses recurring situations the way a teacher uses repeated questions. Not because it enjoys repetition, but because the deeper understanding has not yet fully arrived. The pattern continues until a different response becomes possible. This is why some people spend years trapped in cycles they cannot explain. They change environments but carry the same assumptions. They change goals but keep the same fears. They change partners but repeat the same emotional habits. From the outside, their lives appear to be moving forward. Underneath, the same invisible script keeps playing. Sometimes the pattern appears through opportunities rather than problems. Have you ever noticed a certain possibility repeatedly showing up in your life? A creative path that keeps calling you. A skill that others consistently recognize in you. A direction that returns again and again no matter how often you ignore it. Reality does not only repeat warnings, it also repeats invitations. There are moments when these repetitions become impossible to dismiss. The same topic appears in unrelated conversations. Similar symbols emerge in dreams. The same question follows you through books, encounters, and unexpected observations. It feels as though life is highlighting something in fluorescent ink, waiting for you to pause long enough to notice. Of course, not every repetition carries profound meaning, but some patterns have a peculiar emotional quality. They generate a sense of familiarity mixed with unfinished business. You feel pulled toward them and challenged by them at the same time. Something inside you recognizes their importance before your conscious mind understands why. And once you begin noticing these recurring threads, another mystery starts to emerge. Occasionally, the timing of certain events feels so precise, so strangely aligned with your inner life, that repetition alone no longer seems sufficient to explain what is happening. Almost everyone has experienced it at least once. You think intensely about someone you haven't spoken to in years, and suddenly they contact you. You wrestle with a difficult question, and within hours an unexpected conversation seems to address it directly. You encounter a piece of information at exactly the moment it becomes relevant. The experience leaves behind a strange feeling. Not certainty, but wonder. Most coincidences pass unnoticed because they carry no emotional weight, but some arrive with a peculiar sense of significance. They seem connected not only to external events, but also to your inner state. The timing feels so unusual that the experience lingers in your mind long after it happens. What makes synchronicity fascinating is not whether it proves something supernatural. The deeper question is why certain coincidences feel meaningful in the first place. Why do some random events vanish from memory, while others create the unmistakable impression that reality is participating in a larger conversation? Many people report these experiences during periods of transformation. When life feels stable and predictable, synchronicities often go unnoticed. But during times of uncertainty, grief, transition, or personal growth, they seem to appear more frequently. Or perhaps they do not appear more frequently. Perhaps awareness becomes more sensitive when familiar structures begin to dissolve. Imagine standing at a crossroads in your life. You are uncertain about a decision, carrying a question you cannot answer intellectually. Then, over the course of several days, seemingly unrelated events begin circling around that exact theme. None of them provide a direct answer. Yet together they create a feeling that something important is trying to enter consciousness. This is where many people make a mistake. They assume the coincidence itself contains the message, but often the value lies elsewhere. The event captures your attention, and attention opens perception. The coincidence becomes a doorway rather than a conclusion. It invites deeper observation instead of offering immediate certainty. There is also a profound paradox hidden within synchronicity. The more aggressively someone tries to manufacture signs, the less meaningful they become. Genuine moments of significance often arrive unexpectedly when the mind is not forcing connections. They feel discovered rather than invented, recognized rather than constructed. Perhaps that is why these experiences remain so difficult to explain. They occupy a strange territory between psychology and mystery, between perception and reality. And yet even more intriguing is the possibility that not all responses arrive through alignment and coincidence. Sometimes the clearest response appears in the form of resistance itself. Most people welcome signs that feel encouraging. An unexpected opportunity, a fortunate encounter, a door that opens with surprising ease. These experiences are readily accepted as confirmation that they are moving in the right direction. But when reality responds with obstacles, delays, exhaustion, or repeated setbacks, the interpretation changes completely. Suddenly, the response is viewed as failure. Yet some of life's most important messages arrive disguised as resistance. Not because the universe is against you, and not because you are being punished. Sometimes resistance appears because a deeper adjustment is trying to happen beneath the surface. The path forward exists, but the version of you attempting to walk it is no longer the one that belongs there. Think about a time when you forced something that refused to unfold naturally. A relationship that required constant struggle. A goal that consumed all your energy but never seemed to move. a situation that demanded endless effort while providing very little clarity. Looking back, many people realized they were receiving information long before they finally changed direction. One hidden truth is that resistance often reveals where attachment has become stronger than awareness. When we become emotionally invested in a specific outcome, we stop listening. Every obstacle becomes an enemy. Every delay becomes a threat. We become so focused on reaching the destination that we fail to notice what the resistance itself might be trying to show us. This does not mean every challenge is a sign to quit. Some obstacles are invitations to grow stronger. Others expose weaknesses that need attention. The difficulty lies in recognizing the difference. There are moments when persistence is wisdom, and there are moments when persistence becomes a refusal to see reality as it actually is. You may have experienced periods where life seemed to remove things one after another. Plans collapsed. Certain people drifted away. Opportunities disappeared. At the time, it felt unfair or confusing. But years later, you recognized that those losses cleared space for something that could not have emerged otherwise. What felt like obstruction was quietly creating a new landscape. There is a paradox hidden here. Sometimes what appears to be movement is actually avoidance, while what appears to be delay is preparation. The person who constantly rushes forward may miss the lesson standing directly in front of them. Meanwhile, the person forced to stop may discover something that changes the entire direction of their life. The deeper question is not whether resistance exists. Everyone encounters resistance. The real question is whether you see it only as an obstacle or whether you are willing to consider that it might be communicating something. And often, the first place that communication becomes visible is not in events themselves, but in the emotions those events awaken. Most people are taught to judge emotions as either good or bad. Peace is welcomed. Anxiety is rejected. Excitement is trusted. Emptiness is feared. But what if emotions are not instructions to obey or enemies to defeat? What if they are signals, carrying information that the conscious mind has not yet fully understood? Consider how often your body notices something before your thoughts do. You enter a room and immediately feel tension without knowing why. You meet someone and sense trust or discomfort long before you can explain it logically. Something within you is processing information beneath conscious awareness, and emotions are often the language through which that information rises to the surface. One hidden truth is that emotions frequently point toward misalignment long before external consequences appear. A person may continue succeeding according to society's standards while feeling increasingly empty inside. Everything looks fine from the outside, yet a persistent sense of disconnection quietly signals that something important is being neglected. Many people spend years trying to silence these signals. They distract themselves, stay busy, chase new goals, or convince themselves that the feeling will disappear on its own. Sometimes it does fade temporarily, but then it returns, often stronger than before. The message was never removed. It was simply postponed. Anxiety provides a powerful example. While anxiety can certainly become excessive and distorted, there are moments when it functions as valuable information. It may reveal a conflict between what you are doing and what you truly know. It may expose a truth you have been avoiding. The feeling itself is not always the problem. Sometimes it is pointing toward the problem. The same is true for excitement. People often assume excitement automatically means they are on the right path. Yet excitement can arise from novelty, fantasy, or escape. Genuine alignment tends to carry something different. Beneath the enthusiasm, there is usually a quieter feeling of steadiness. A sense that something fits, even when uncertainty remains. Perhaps you have noticed this distinction during major life decisions. One option creates intense excitement mixed with underlying tension. Another creates less emotional intensity, but a deeper sense of peace. The mind often becomes fascinated by the first option. The deeper self frequently recognizes the second. Learning to distinguish between these signals changes everything. And this raises an intriguing possibility. If emotions, patterns, coincidences, and resistance can all function as forms of feedback, then perhaps this way of viewing reality is not entirely new. Perhaps human beings have been exploring this relationship for thousands of years, long before modern psychology gave it new language, long before modern psychology began exploring perception, meaning, and the unconscious. Many ancient traditions shared a surprisingly similar intuition. They viewed human beings not as isolated observers trapped inside a meaningless universe, but as participants in an ongoing relationship with reality itself. The outer world and the inner world were not seen as completely separate domains. They reflected one another in ways that were subtle, symbolic, and deeply personal. Across different cultures and centuries, people noticed something that remains familiar today. Periods of inner confusion often seemed accompanied by outer disorder. Moments of clarity frequently coincided with unexpected opportunities. This was not understood as magic. It was understood as correspondence. The belief that changes within a person influence how reality is perceived, interpreted, and engaged with. One hidden truth behind many ancient teachings is that they were less concerned with predicting the future and more concerned with understanding patterns. The focus was not on controlling reality, but on learning how to read its reflections. Symbols, stories, myths, dreams, and recurring events were treated as mirrors, capable of revealing aspects of the self that ordinary awareness overlooked. You can still observe this principle in everyday life. Two people experience the same event and emerge with completely different interpretations. One sees rejection. The other sees redirection. One sees catastrophe. The other sees transformation. The event remains identical. Yet the meaning changes because meaning is shaped partly by the inner landscape of the observer. This perspective introduces a fascinating possibility. What if reality is not only showing you the world? What if it is also showing you yourself? Not through supernatural messages hidden in every corner, but through the way certain experiences repeatedly attract your attention. Through what frustrates you, through what inspires you, through what refuses to leave your thoughts. Many ancient philosophies suggested that life constantly reveals the state of our relationship with ourselves. When a person lives in conflict with their deeper values, the world often feels fragmented and hostile. When greater alignment emerges, reality can begin to feel strangely cooperative. Not because external circumstances become perfect, but because perception becomes less divided. Perhaps this explains why certain periods of life feel unusually meaningful. You are not necessarily receiving more signs than before. Instead, you become more aware of the dialogue already taking place. The boundary between inner experience and outer experience appears less rigid. Events begin to feel connected through meaning rather than through simple cause and effect. But there is a danger hidden within this way of thinking. The moment someone begins recognizing patterns everywhere, another temptation emerges. The temptation to believe that every event, every coincidence, every detail must carry a profound message. And that is where discernment becomes essential. When people first begin noticing meaningful patterns, there is often a period of excitement. Life suddenly feels richer, more connected, more alive. Coincidences stand out. Repetitions become impossible to ignore. Seemingly ordinary moments acquire new significance. But without balance, this heightened awareness can slowly transform into something else entirely. The human mind is a pattern-detecting machine. It evolved to find connections, anticipate outcomes, and identify meaning. This ability is one of our greatest strengths. Yet it also comes with a hidden weakness. Once the mind becomes convinced that a particular pattern exists, it can start finding evidence for that pattern everywhere, whether it is truly there or not. You may have experienced a harmless version of this yourself. Perhaps after buying a particular car, you suddenly noticed that model everywhere on the road. The cars were always there. Your attention simply became tuned to them. The same process can occur with symbols, numbers, themes, and signs. Awareness sharpens, but interpretation can easily run ahead of reality. One hidden danger is the desire for certainty. Life contains ambiguity, uncertainty, and unanswered questions. Many people find this uncomfortable. So when they encounter a coincidence, they immediately turn it into a conclusion. A repeated number becomes proof. A chance encounter becomes destiny. A random event becomes a definitive message. The uncertainty disappears, but so does genuine curiosity. Real discernment works differently. It remains open. It observes without rushing. It allows meaning to emerge gradually rather than forcing it into existence. Mature perception understands that not every coincidence is profound, and not every unusual experience carries a hidden instruction. Sometimes a coincidence is simply a coincidence. There is a subtle emotional difference between recognition and obsession. Recognition feels calm. It creates curiosity. It invites reflection. Obsession feels urgent. It demands certainty. It creates anxiety whenever answers remain incomplete. One expands awareness. The other narrows it. Learning this distinction protects people from becoming trapped inside their own interpretations. Interestingly, the strongest signals often do not arrive with dramatic certainty at all. They tend to reveal themselves through consistency over time. The same theme appears from multiple directions. The same lesson returns through different circumstances. Meaning accumulates gradually, like a picture becoming clearer as more pieces fall into place. And perhaps that is the greatest challenge of all. Not learning how to find more signs, but learning how to perceive clearly enough to distinguish between what is genuinely meaningful and what is merely noise. Because the final shift is not about making reality speak louder. It is about becoming the kind of person who can finally hear what has been there from the beginning. At a certain point, the question stops being whether reality is responding. The more important question becomes whether you are available enough to notice it. Most people spend years waiting for a louder message, a clearer sign, a more obvious answer. Yet the deeper transformation begins when attention shifts away from demanding certainty and toward developing perception. This is not about becoming more spiritual, more mystical, or more knowledgeable. It is about becoming more present. The signals that matter most are often buried beneath habits of distraction. They are hidden behind assumptions, routines, fears, and expectations. Reality may be speaking constantly, but if the mind is always racing toward the next concern, there is little space left to hear it. Think about how many insights arrive when you stop forcing them. During a quiet walk, while looking out a window, in the moments just before sleep, in conversations that were never intended to answer your questions. The mind relaxes its grip, and suddenly something becomes visible that had been present all along. The answer feels new, even though it may have been waiting for months. One hidden truth is that awareness grows through observation, not control. Many people try to force clarity by analyzing everything. Yet meaning often reveals itself through patient attention rather than constant interpretation. A recurring emotion, a repeated situation, a pattern that quietly persists. Over time, these threads begin connecting themselves. This is why reflection remains so powerful, not because it produces immediate answers, but because it creates distance from the noise. When you write down your experiences, revisit old decisions, or simply pause long enough to observe your own life, patterns become easier to recognize. What once appeared random starts revealing an underlying structure. You may notice that certain lessons followed you across years. Certain fears shaped multiple choices. Certain desires kept returning despite every attempt to ignore them. These discoveries are rarely dramatic. They arrive with a quiet sense of recognition. A feeling that says, of course, it was always there. And perhaps that is the real shift. Not becoming someone who constantly searches for signs, but becoming someone who pays attention. Someone who remains curious without becoming obsessive. Someone who can tolerate uncertainty without rushing toward false certainty. Someone willing to observe before concluding. Because the greatest responses from reality are often not found in extraordinary events. They are found in ordinary moments that suddenly reveal extraordinary meaning. And once you begin seeing them, it becomes difficult to return to the old assumption that life is merely a sequence of disconnected accidents. Maybe that is what this entire journey has been pointing toward. Not the idea that every event carries a secret message. Not the belief that reality is constantly sending supernatural instructions. But the possibility that life is far more responsive, meaningful, and interconnected than most people realize. That the patterns, emotions, coincidences, resistance, and recurring themes you've experienced may not be random interruptions to your path. They may be part of the path itself. When you look back carefully, you may discover that some of the most important answers never arrived as answers at all. They arrived as experiences. As delays that redirected you. As emotions that revealed something hidden. As patterns that repeated until you were finally ready to see them. As moments that seemed insignificant at the time, but later became turning points. And perhaps the most surprising realization is this. Reality may not need to speak louder. The real transformation happens when you become quiet enough to notice that it has been responding all along. If this message resonated with something you've been experiencing, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more hidden patterns, psychological insights, and deeper layers of reality that we're going to explore together. And before you go, leave a comment with one simple word. Response. Not for the algorithm, but as a small acknowledgement that you've begun paying attention to something many people spend their entire lives overlooking. Until next time, stay curious. Some of the answers you're looking for may already be finding their way to you.